Hello and welcome to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller. It is good to be back with you, and today's episode is something that comes from a lot of conversations with you. In fact, you voted for it. We asked you recently on Instagram to pick some episodes that you'd like me to dig into or some concepts that you wanted to know some more about. And one of the resounding topics that you wanted me to focus on was this feeling of being left behind. I wonder whether there is aspects of your life that don't look how you thought they might at the age that you are. I wonder whether life has taken some different directions to what you thought. I wonder whether you're looking at the people around you and you're thinking they're much nearer to where they wanted to be or I wanted to be at a certain age. There was a film that came out in 2020 called The Worst Person in the World. And in this film, it's a story of a woman who's on the brink of turning 30, but you could add in turning 40 or turning 50 or turning 60. And in the film, she's trying to figure out who she should date, what she should do, and where she should live. And there's a particular scene when it's her actual birthday and she spirals into a panic. And in this moment of panic, she sees her mother and she sees her grandmother at the table. And then she sees the photo of her great-grandmother and her great-grandmother. And apparently what happens is the narrator explains that in each generation before this girl's life, at this point in their life, they knew who they were, they had a career, they had a partner, they had a child. But for this character, Julie, everything is still up in the air. She has this panic that sets in that's all about not being where you thought you'd be at a certain point. And this is known as a bit of milestone anxiety. It might not be that it's your actual birthday, but you feel like you're reaching a milestone in your life and the plan, either your plan or other people's plan, has deviated and you're not living it. You're nowhere near where you thought you'd be, or so much stuff has happened that has meant this doesn't look anything like how I thought it would. I did get married, but actually now I'm divorced, or I haven't met my life partner yet, and so I haven't had children. Or I don't even know what I'm doing for a career because I don't really enjoy what I do. I'm still living in an area I don't want to live. I don't own a home. I haven't done certain things I wanted to do. I'm still off schedule. And this is this idea of anxiety that especially comes up when we are hitting a milestone birthday often. So there's some really interesting research around that. There's some interesting research around this idea of being at in what they call the 9 years, so 29, 39, 49, that you approach this feeling of reassessment of your life. And it can be that you're reassessing and this spurs you on to do something about it. And you think, right, I'm going to do a challenge. I'm going to run an ultra marathon, or I'm going to go and solo travel or something wild like that. Or it can cause us to introspect in a way that actually is sabotaging and negative and causes us to spiral into depression and anxiety and real disappointment or maybe even grief over the way life looks. And I first of all just want to say that if you are feeling any of these feelings around life doesn't look like I thought it would, or my peers are doing things that I'm not doing, or I'm not on a schedule that I set for myself, or the expected schedule, or the one that I had hoped would be for me, you are absolutely not alone. This is so much more widely felt by so many more people. Now, some of the kind of natural milestones I actually hit quite early because I had my children young. So I didn't experience the feeling of not having met a life partner or having my children young because I did it so early that I kind of did it earlier than expected. But there are loads of other things that I've experienced where I'm like, I'm off track here. And you know, one of them has been I'm still dealing with things like in my personality and in my character that I really feel I should have grown out of by now. And I think I'm in my 40s and this is still an issue for me. I'm still insecure about friendships, or I still haven't managed to do this on my own. I still find this a big deal. I'm still dealing with all sorts of different patterns of behaviours that really I'm off schedule for. And so it doesn't always present in like a milestone of having a baby. It can also be I'm not everything I thought I'd be as a person. On top of that, it might be that you have watched generations before do things in a certain way. And of course, you'll be dealing with different pressures to previous generations, and things do just look different. And sometimes we look on social media and we see what all the people in our class were doing. I remember there was something called Friends Reunited that came out years and years ago, I think when I was young. And Friends Reunited was all about getting back together with school friends. And there was all sorts of unintended consequences of Friends Reunited. Some people just got very low from hearing about what all these people in their year group were up to, and they weren't. And also some people ended up rekindling, childhood romances and doing all sorts of not very wise things because they were trying to relive a moment that they were no longer in. And so I think what I'm trying to say here is this is actually not a new phenomenon. I imagine that it's had its own version of this in every previous generation and every previous iteration of thinking, I'm not on schedule, I'm not on time, it's too late. On top of that, it's now too late for me. There are a lot of people who think that everything needs to happen by certain ages. And actually, there are some things that really annoy me, like the most powerful people under 30, like the 30 under 30. Like we're really championing, you've got to do it by a certain point. When actually some of the most incredible things that have taken place over the last century have been people who were way older in their life when they've done it. And I guess there's something to ask ourselves about, like, what's driving this feeling of hitting certain milestones in a certain order by a certain time? And is it helpful for us to be feeling that sense of pressure to do things based on how things have looked for other people? I think for some people, they just don't even know what they want anymore, and they're just exhausted as well. So how do I even begin to resolve this problem when I'm just too tired to even think about it? You watch other people doing things that you'd hoped for yourself, and there's this massive feeling of regret. I'm not in this space. What did I do wrong? Why am I not there? And I think what's really important to recognise here is that so many people are doing this. You might be looking at your friend who has got children and is in that space of child rearing and managing the juggle with that and doing some work and whatever. And they're looking on at your life and watching you go on this amazing holiday to, Puerto Rico, and doing incredible solo traveling and forging ahead in your career. And they're saying, look at what they're doing and I'm not. So actually this being left behind can often just be that people's lives are taking different trajectories or different to the one that we'd expected. And I think for some people, especially women, this is accentuated by when they've put some of their own hopes and dreams on the back burner, and then they don't know how to take them back off that space. They've been willing to do it and actually they've felt it's the right thing to do, but then they don't know how to bring it back from that space. I think I just want to say, there's so much hope for all of us to move forward in this. If you've put some things on the back burner, that may have been the absolute right thing to do, but it doesn't mean that's where they have to stay forever. And as twee as it sounds, none of us are on some sort of schedule that we need to meet certain timeframes or do things in certain periods of time. It happens kind of when it happens. But there is more of this going on than you realise. There's so many of us who are feeling this sense of milestone anxiety, and actually people think it's a growing experience. It really impacts our well-being as well, because when we start to think we're under this pressure, we actually don't think so clearly, and it can actually be quite demotivating rather than motivating towards the change. And as I said before, this 9 year, if you're in one, can be quite an interesting thing to have to approach, and we'll probably talk about that some more at another time. So I think talking about this is really important, but then trying to realise that it doesn't even have to be a milestone. It can just be this feeling of, I didn't expect my life to look like this at this point, and I'd hoped for different. And I think most of us would agree that our current life isn't everything we thought it would be. That doesn't mean it's not wonderful, but it probably doesn't represent everything we thought it would be. So I'm 45 years old, and there's loads of things in my life right now that I had no idea would be part of my experiences. Those aren't necessarily bad things, some of them are really good things. But if you'd have asked me to plot it out or think of where I'd be at, this is not that. And what fuels that feeling sometimes of it not being good enough is then when I start to compare or look at where other people are who are my peers. And I think they have things that I don't have, or I didn't expect it to look like that, or I'm disappointed that it isn't this way. And that can be around work, that can be around our personal life, that can be about finances, homes, lifestyles, family opportunities, wider family, career, education, all sorts of things can be in the mix here around us feeling left behind. And when we stop and talk about it, as I'm even talking about this out loud, I realise that it sounds a bit mad, almost like our lives should be in parallel and that things are going to happen to people at the same time and that those who do it early are winners. As I actually say that out loud, I realise there's not a win. You know, there aren't winners in this. I remember when I was having Noah, and I was the first of my kind of friends at uni and so on to have a baby, I was having a different kind of anxiety that I'd stepped off something, and what if I couldn't get my chance later? But they were maybe looking on at me and going, look at Hannah, she's met the love of her life and she's having children. And so they could have been looking on at my life and thinking, Hannah's ticking the boxes, and I'm looking at their life thinking, flip, they're ticking loads of boxes that I just am nowhere near. So I think we often don't realise that the very thing that we're comparing to, other people are looking at in your life and thinking, well, look at what you're able to do that I'm not. And I think that's been quite a helpful reflection for me to have. This is just a really interesting bit of information here, which is not directly what we're talking about, but it shows a bit about how we view the world. There was a 2010 study by an economist called Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman, who's a psychologist who's written lots of good books like Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And he found that it's how your income compares to your friends rather than how much you actually earn, that affects your overall life satisfaction. The higher your income rank in your friendship group, the happier you feel. And that is like a little microcosm of the way our brains work. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about income or other things. It's more about, am I doing how I thought I would in relation to my peers, and am I doing better than a lot of them, or in my eyes or perceptions better than the actual reality of where I'm at globally or my actual experiences. And this social comparison that we do, and I talk about this a lot in the book, a shameless plug, if you want to pre-order the book, do so. This idea that we compare like this, it mostly doesn't have any good outcomes for us. And for us to be feeling milestone anxiety, feeling left behind, we must be comparing to something. You can't feel left behind if you're not comparing. It's not possible. You can't have a milestone anxiety if there's not something you're comparing to what it should be. So there is a comparison that's going on, comparisons I'm making to other people, that you're making to other people, that are actually pretty unhelpful, because how we can directly compare a life with so many factors in it is really quite ridiculous. And when we stop and look at our own lives, and I think of all the things that people might be looking at my life and thinking, you know, she has this and she has this, whereas I'm looking at theirs and considering all the things that they have that I don't have and experience, we realise that it's a futile waste of emotional energy and actually saps us from the feeling that we can make change in our life. Your timeline, my timeline, other people's timelines are not going to be in sync. They're not even going to be in sync with my own expectations. And this is because there are so many things that happen that are outside of our control. And so there are many, many things about the way the timeline of my life and the things I've achieved have taken place that are to do with some decisions I've made and things that are outside of my control. I also think we've got to look at it as, what have I had, rather than seeing it as this vacuum of I'm left behind. What is it that you've been able to do because this didn't happen that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do? And I think some of this comes back to the idea that there's a new narrative, especially for women of kind of my age and maybe, 55 and under. There is a new narrative which is, you can have everything. You can do what you want, you can have children, you can have a career, you can have a life, you can do all of these things which puts yourself at the centre, and all of these things are in my power to do, when most of us are realising that that's just not true. And if you're going to pursue this, you cannot pursue this as well. And Michelle Obama said this. She said, you can't have everything at the same time. You can potentially go after anything you want to, but not all of the same things at the same time. So maybe in feeling left behind, there's something that you've done that you wouldn't have been able to do had not done that thing. So if I use myself as an example, I'm in my 40s and my children are all quite old, which means that I'm going to be quite young when I become an empty nester. But that has meant that other things I could have done in my 20s, like travel. I didn't travel. I didn't leave the UK for about 10 years, and probably more than that. I didn't do that. I didn't go hard after my career without any sort of recognition that I was also a mother. It's meant that was something I couldn't pursue. So if I look on to somebody who's done all of those things, I'm going to be way behind. And so this direct comparison is quite ludicrous, and it actually stems back to a belief, which I just don't think is true, that you can pursue all the things at the same time with the same gusto, with the same outcomes. But there are also things perhaps that I was able to do in those years that other people won't be able to do if they're having their children 20 years later than I did. It's going to look different for them. So there's a couple of points I want to make here as you're reflecting on this and give you some things to consider. I think one thing I'd say is that comparing to previous generations is quite unhelpful for every single generation. Every generation has had its own challenges and its own comparisons and its own compromises to make. If I was comparing myself to 5 generations ago, you'd say that I was mad. But actually, even a generation at the speed of change and the way life looks, it's just not a comparison for me to even compare with my mom. And even maybe for me to be comparing to the generation that's just leaving university. I feel like that wasn't very long ago, but actually so much has changed. So we can't do comparisons to previous generations because things are changing. I think one of the things I'd encourage you to do is to think about your values. What is it that matters to you? And are you comparing yourself to a life that actually you're not sure would even be in line with your values and make you happy? You might look on at something and think, I'd love that, but would you really? Is it really a representation of your values, let alone a representation of your strengths, your talents, your true strengths, your personality? Know who you are as well. Things that are available to some people are not available to all of us. There are things that I just can't do. They're not going to make me happy. I'm not going to be very good at them. There's no point me hankering after that as a life goal because it's not my area of talent and expertise. There are some things that I'm just not good enough at for it to be something that I'm ever going to be leading in that area. So you need to know yourself, know your true strengths, know your values in order to then make an actual real decision around, am I hankering after something that isn't even what I want? And then, of course, there may be the reality that there are things that you really want that are aligned with your values and are aligned with your strengths and personality. And that's another point of is it your priorities or other people's priorities that you're feeling led by? And that's such an important question to dig into. What other people want for us or think's best for us is not the recipe to a life of contentment. If I project onto my kids what I think they should do with the rest of their lives, that is not a recipe for them to live fulfilling lives. If I choose my work career because somebody else says this is a good and lucrative decision, but it's not what I want to do, it might tick certain boxes, but it is not going to take away that anxiety of my life not looking like I want it to. I'm actually going to move further away. So knowing what your priorities are, realizing that not everything can be a priority, is another really important thing to reflect on. And I think if you've done that, if you've thought about your priorities, your values, your strengths, and you feel like your life isn't where you want it to, there's then a really important thing to do. And I think it's having a really honest conversation with yourself about the stuff that's in your control and the stuff that isn't. There are certain things that you may have to make your peace with are not going to happen, or not going to look the way you thought they might, or be not attainable for you in the way you thought they would. And making peace with that is so important to the life you're actually in feeling fulfilled. There are certain things about my life that I cannot change, and I may wish were different, but I can't do anything about it. And making peace with that has been a very important part of my my growth as a person. Then there are lots of other things that are way more in our control than we realise, and we can make steps towards them. If you haven't met a life partner and you want to, but you're not going anywhere to meet anybody, you're not going to. So what's the step towards? What's a step towards the thing that you actually want your life to look like? Never meeting new people is going to mean that door stays shut. There is something that, most of us don't get a knock on the front door with the solutions appearing in front of our eyes. I mean, wouldn't that be lovely? But it isn't what happens. If you want to change careers and you always wish you'd been a doctor, unless you take a step towards, it's not going to happen. So you either have to decide, said with all the love in the world, do I put this dream to bed and make my peace with it, or is it something I need to move towards? I think for the vast majority of you, it's probably something you can still move towards. It might look a bit different to you first thought, but it could still be out there for you, whatever element of your life this is. There's a process that I encourage people to go through in my book, and I go through it in much more detail in the book, The Purpose Pursuit, available for pre-order. Lol. I will stop saying that all the time, but it's new and exciting, so I'm saying it at the moment. But it's a process that I encourage people to go through when they realise they need to think about making some shift if they want something to look different, but they're not quite sure what to do. And I use the 4 points of a compass. So the first thing is we go south. That's like going back in time. And we think about the last 3 months or so of our life. And we reflect on the good stuff. We have gratitude for the progress we've made, the things that we've done in our work life, our personal life, whatever it might be. And I encourage people to just make a long list of things that have already happened in their life over the last 3 or so months that they can have gratitude for. It's a great starting place. We miss out on so much of our life by just not recognising the progress that we've already made and the things we have to be grateful for. And then when we've gone south, we then go north, and we go north into the future, and we think about 12 months from now. And we begin to imagine if we were moving closer towards those milestones or those hopes and dreams, what would I want to say about my life 12 months from now? And I actually encourage people to almost like write themselves a diary entry or as if they're writing an email to a friend and telling them about their life. What would you want to say? Would you want to say, oh, I've moved house, or I've got a new job, or I've met someone, or I'm now running, I've done Couch to 5K, or whatever the things are that you'd like to be able to say. Write it as if you are talking about it in the first person present tense. So we've done going back and we've gone going forward, south and then north. Then we go east. And so east is going into the next 3 months from now. So if you want to be able to say that in 12 months, that you've made a shift and life is beginning to look different, what do you need to do in the next 3 months? If I want to have moved house in 12 months, what am I going to do in the next 3 months? I'm probably going to do some research about where. I might have my own house valued. I might think about some jobs, that make a list of jobs that need to be done in my own home to sell it. I might go and see a mortgage advisor and see how much money I can borrow. What can I do in the next 3 months to make that 12-month reality more likely? And then I've added in going west, which is a final element of this south, north, east, west. As well as going east and making a plan, the west is about expanding your horizon a little bit. What's 10% braver than what you just said? What's another thing that stretches you a little bit more than you maybe felt you had capacity for? Go back to that 3-month plan and stretch it a bit. Maybe it's also about how do you broaden your horizon to think about the people around you, supporting other people, doing something for the good or the community around you, stretching your horizon to be less about yourself and more about others around you too, and adding that into your list of to-dos for the next 3 months. That is such a helpful process that I've kind of developed, taking learning from other people and making it my own to help you feel a bit more agency, that we can begin to make change in our life. It's very simple, but if we don't do this, 3 months can pass and nothing's changed. But actually those tweaks over those 3 months can mean we are 10% nearer to where we want to be. And then you can repeat the process and go again. I want to go back to that point about gratitude. We can miss so much of life by not being grateful for what we have. I've been in a pretty sticky spot for lots of reasons lately. And my husband, who's recently lost his mum, just said to me, Hannah, there is so much that is so beautiful about our life. And that gratitude for what's beautiful about our life the things that we have and the things that we've been able to experience in terms of emotions and connection is so important to be reminded of. There is always a reason to be grateful. And you know what? I think we need to be honest. I've said some of the things that I've felt around this milestone anxiety or this feeling left behind. We need to find people that we can trust and say, I'm struggling with this, I'm finding this hard. You're not alone. Most people have seen their life perhaps in a certain timeline view, and they won't have met all those markers. Maybe a timeline is not the way to look at this. Maybe more of a map, or the idea of something that's a squiggly, ups and downsy pursuit of life is more helpful than a destination that we reach by a certain point, which probably won't meet all our expectations anyway. And I think I'm just going to go back to something I say a lot, you can't be an imposter if you're just being you. You can't compare your life to somebody else's if you recognise that you have one unique life that is not comparable to somebody else's. The circumstances and the experiences around your life are just yours, and they're not in comparison to somebody else's, because your life is incomparable. The life you have in front of you, warts and all, will never be repeated. And what's most important is that we take hold of that opportunity with gratitude and with a recognition of the agency we do have, and making our peace for the things that we do not. Bye for now.